The morning air at the proving grounds carried a quiet tension, the kind that settles over a battlefield before the first shot is fired. In that pale English light, a German Panther tank rolled forward 45 tons of steel and reputation, its dark silhouette cutting through the mist like a promise made in another war. For months, Allied soldiers had heard stories about this machine. Stories of a tank so advanced, so fearsome, that even seasoned crews spoke its name with a mixture of caution and respect. But machines, like men, can hide their truths. What the engineers gathered here wanted to know was simple. Was the Panther truly the invincible beast German propaganda claimed it to be? Or had the war forged yet another myth out of fear and smoke? Its sloped armor, its high-velocity gun, its sleek mechanical design, all of it suggested a weapon built to dominate the battlefield. Yet beneath every machine lies a different story. One revealed only when metal meets real earth, when gears face real strain, when theory confronts the weight of war. And on this quiet morning, that story was about to unfold bolt by bolt, mile by mile. Long before the Panther arrived at the proving grounds in England, its legend had already taken shape on the battlefields of the Eastern Front. Reports spoken in hushed tones filtered back to Allied intelligence stories of a sleek, angular machine that seemed to shrug off enemy fire and return it with devastating precision. German newsreels portrayed it cutting through Soviet lines, a symbol of renewed armored dominance at a time when the Third Reich desperately needed victories, real or imagined. But behind that legend lay a different beginning. The Panther had been conceived not in calm laboratories or measured engineering halls, but under the crushing urgency of war. In early 1943, with the tide turning against Germany, Adolf Hitler demanded a new tank in time for the summer offensive at Kursk. The deadline was immovable. The design was incomplete. Testing was rushed. And yet the order remained. This new tank must be ready for battle. Under that pressure, engineers shaped a machine that looked extraordinary on paper-sloped 80mm frontal armor, a high-velocity 7.5 centimeters gun, and a suspension system that promised smooth handling across broken ground. It was a design meant to impress, a statement of industrial defiance. Across the Channel, British intelligence watched these developments with increasing urgency. The Allies were preparing for a return to Western Europe. Every soldier, every airman, every tanker who would land in Normandy needed to understand what might be waiting for them on the other side of the hedgerows. A tank that German propaganda claimed was invincible could not be taken at face value. It had to be understood, stripped down, tested, measured, and judged by standards far harsher than paper promises. So when the Soviets captured one of the earliest Panthers on the Eastern Front and agreed to send it to Britain, the opportunity was invaluable. The machine that arrived in Surrey was scarred from service, heavy with the dust of another battlefield, its serial number 21310, etched into steel that had already seen war. British engineers at the Fighting Vehicles Proving Establishment had spent years evaluating their own machines. Churchills, Cromwells, Shermans. They knew their strengths, their imperfections, their breaking points. What they did not yet know was whether the Panther belonged among them as a practical weapon or only as a spectacle. As they prepared the captured tank for its first trials, a quiet realization settled over the team. If this machine truly were as formidable as the Germans claimed, then every mile it covered in these fields would shape the decisions of commanders preparing for Normandy. If it were flawed, if its armor hid fragile machinery, if its power masked instability, then that too would change how Allied crews would face it in combat. Either way, the truth waited beneath the steel plates and the engine hatches. And the first cracks in the Panther's legend were about to appear. The first real signs of trouble emerged, not with fire or smoke, but with a sound that every experienced tank driver instantly recognized as the hollow grind of gears refusing to mesh. When the Panther's transmission slipped past second gear into third, nothing awaited the crew but a violent shudder and the metallic rattle of gears jumping free. No traction, no engagement, just a dead, empty space where a critical gear should have been. To the British drivers, men who had spent years wrestling with Churchills, Cromwells, and even captured German machines, this was not stubbornness. It was failure. A 7-speed gearbox was supposed to offer fine control over a tank's movement. Instead, the Panther's intricate system revealed a fragility hidden beneath its imposing frame. Something inside, perhaps a sliding collar, perhaps a synchronization ring, had already torn itself apart, and the trials had barely begun. Yet the engineers pressed on, marking the failure in their logs with the calm precision of men accustomed to disappointment. They could work around a missing gear. What they could not ignore was how the tank behaved when the tests moved from paved surfaces into the ragged countryside. Here, the Panther's promise of advanced suspension unraveled quickly. Its dual torsion bar system, 18 overlapping road wheels per side, looked like a masterpiece of German engineering. But looks were all it offered. The moment the tank struck uneven ground, the nose dipped sharply, the front suspension bottoming out with a bone-jarring impact. Inside the turret, crewmen were thrown against their harnesses as though the earth itself were striking back. Instruments rattled, metal vibrated. Every bump became a punishment. To verify their impressions, the British mounted accelerometers inside the hull and filmed the suspension travel. The data told the same story their bruises did. The theoretical elegance of the Panther's suspension had collapsed under real pressure. Its travel was short, its damping inconsistent, its ride harsher than the simpler, heavier Churchill, whose coil springs absorbed the same terrain with steady, almost patient resilience. On smooth roads, the Panther could achieve the speeds German manuals promised. But cross-country, where war is actually fought, the Panther lagged behind the Churchill 7th, a tank designed for infantry support rather than speed. A machine advertised as agile moved instead with the sluggish weight of a heavy tank, without the heavy tank's protection on its flanks and rear. And then came the flames. During hill climb trials, the Panther managed to crest a 40-degree slope, a feat of power, the engineers duly noted. But as it descended in reverse, a violent backfire erupted inside the engine bay. The explosion blew open the access hatches. Orange gasoline flame roared outward. Black smoke rolled across the slope. For a moment, the tank looked less like a weapon and more like a furnace. The fire teams extinguished the blaze within seconds, but the engineers understood what the flames meant. This was no isolated malfunction. It was a warning one that would echo again in the tests still to come. What the British had discovered in this phase of the trials was simple, undeniable, and deeply troubling. The Panther's battlefield reputation had been built on paper strength, not mechanical truth. If the 1,944 trials had exposed cracks in the Panther's mechanical facade, then the post-war program would shatter it completely. In the ruins of Hanover, British engineers found what remained of one of Germany's major Panther assembly plants, rows of engines, half-completed hulls, transmissions still wrapped in wartime grease. Under British supervision, and with German workers who had once built these machines for the Wehrmacht, 9 Panthers and a dozen Jagdpanthers were assembled with care that the pressures of war had never allowed. These were Panthers built without air raids, without deadlines, without shortages, Panthers born under ideal conditions. And yet, even these would fail. When the vehicles arrived at the fighting grounds in 1947, the plan was ambitious. Each would undergo the full British acceptance program, the same trial that new British tanks were expected to survive. No shortcuts, no allowances for reputation. The first failure revealed itself during a cross-country maneuver. As a Panther attempted a sharp turn across uneven ground, its steering clutch, already strained by the tank's weight, burned itself out in seconds. Smoke poured from the housing. The mechanism disintegrated. The vehicle could turn only in one direction. It was withdrawn and stripped for parts, its steering system declared inadequate by design, not by accident. Another Panther met a more familiar fate. During a run beneath the winter sky, its Maybach engine once again betrayed the machine. Temperature gauges crept upward. Coolant hissed. The compartment filled with the same sickening heat the British had seen 3 years earlier. Then, a deafening backfire, an explosion so violent that flames erupted through the armored grills. By the time the fire crews subdued the blaze, the engine was little more than warped steel and charred wiring. It was beyond repair. The first Jagdpanther lasted longer, long enough to inspire a brief hope, but its gearbox, stressed by the vehicle's weight and torque, began shedding teeth under load. When the gears finally stripped completely, the tank shuddered to a halt. That left a single operational Jagdpanther to carry the burden of the trial. Mechanics cannibalized the others, engines, clutches, road wheels, all sacrificed to keep one machine running. They managed a handful of runs, each one leaving the vehicle a little more wounded. The steering grew erratic, the transmission groaned, oil consumption surged. Then came the hill trials. The Jagdpanther climbed the steep 35% grade with slow, deliberate power. At the crest, the driver applied the brakes as protocol demanded. The tank held its position for a moment, 5 seconds at most, before the pedal collapsed beneath his foot. The brakes had failed. 46 tons began sliding backward down the slope. The driver fought the controls, but the vehicle gathered speed, uncontrolled and accelerating. It struck an old tree stump at the base with devastating force. A torsion bar snapped under the impact and punched through the gearbox like a spear, tearing open the steel housing. Oil gushed out onto the earth. Transmission gears spun apart, shattered beyond hope. The last functioning vehicle was dead. With no operational machines left and no spare parts to revive them, the British ended the trials early. The February 1948 report stated the truth plainly. Panther and Jagdpanther tanks were inherently unreliable, their engine fires and steering failures so severe that completing the program had become impossible. In the calm language of military engineering, the verdict was final. To understand the full weight of the Panther's story, one has to look beyond the proving grounds of Britain and follow its shadow across the battlefields of Europe. For the Allies, and especially for the United States, the Panther was more than an enemy vehicle. It was a symbol of German industrial ambition, a machine designed to project fear whether it worked or not. And in the months before Normandy, American and British strategists studied every report, every sketch, every captured note to learn what this new weapon might mean for the campaign ahead. Much of the early intelligence came not from Allied tests, but from the German front lines themselves. At Kursk in July 1943, American analysts were stunned by the scale of mechanical failure in German after-action reports. Of the 200 Panthers committed to the offensive, the majority fell out not from Soviet fire, but from internal collapse, broken final drives, seized transmissions, engines that burst into flames under their own strain. The numbers painted a picture not of a breakthrough weapon, but of a rushed experiment forced prematurely into war. For American commanders preparing for Normandy, this distinction mattered. The Panther's gun was deadly. Its armor was formidable, but its weaknesses offered a strategic opening. U.S. tacticians began recommending engagements in close-terrain hedgerows, villages, forests where the Panther's long-range gun was less influential and its fragile steering system faced constant stress. Force it to maneuver sharply. Force it to reverse. Force it into the kind of work the machine simply could not endure. After the war, the French reached the same conclusion. Operating captured Panthers in occupation units, even with access to German mechanics and spare parts, became an exercise in frustration. Engines overheated, fuel systems failed, final drives cracked open under loads they were never truly built to sustain. By 1950, France abandoned the Panther entirely in favor of American-built Shermans and its own emerging designs, proof that battlefield mastery depends on reliability as much as raw power. For the United States, these lessons carried forward into Cold War doctrine. A tank must not only fire and move, it must endure. It must remain repairable in the mud, the rain, the cold, with ordinary crews and limited tools. The Panther, for all its brilliance on paper, offered the opposite. It revealed the danger of engineering that chases perfection while ignoring the realities of war. And across the Allied world, the verdict became the same. The Panther was a weapon feared in theory, but defeated by its own design. In the end, the Panther's story did not conclude with a dramatic battlefield duel or a final stand in the ruins of a collapsing front. Instead, its truth emerged slowly, through the steady work of engineers, test crews, and soldiers who learned to look past reputation and into the steel itself. What they found was a machine caught between ambition and reality, a tank designed to impress, but not to endure. The Panther was born from a moment of desperation, refined under pressure, and fielded before its faults could be understood, let alone corrected. Its armor was admirable, its gun was exceptional. Its silhouette struck fear into the hearts of men who saw it crest a hill or emerge from the tree line. But war does not reward beauty on paper, nor does it forgive fragility. A tank is more than its specifications. It is a promise one that must hold under mud, heat, strain, and the thousand small failures that creep in when the world is on fire. British trials in 1944 and again in 1948 revealed the truth with clinical clarity. So did the fields of Kursk, the bocage of Normandy, the riverbanks of Holland, and the occupation roads of post-war Germany. The Panther could dominate in isolated moments, but it could not sustain itself through a campaign. Its strength was sharp, but brief. Its weaknesses were deep and constant. And its legacy, stripped of propaganda, became a cautionary tale about engineering that forgets the battlefield. For historians, the lesson is clear: reliability is a weapon. For soldiers, the message is even simpler. The best tank is the one that still moves when the order comes to push forward. The echoes of these trials linger today. They remind us that every machine, no matter how feared, admired, or mythologized, must eventually answer to the realities of war. And sometimes, the fiercest legends are undone not by enemy fire, but by the quiet judgment of time. So as we close this chapter, consider your own view. What do you think matters most in a weapon of war, raw power, or the ability to endure? Share your thoughts below, and if stories like this deepen your understanding of the past, stay with us. There are many more histories waiting to be uncovered, stories of courage, failure, innovation, and the lessons that still echo across today's battlefields. Thank you for watching, and for keeping these memories alive.